Look, I'm Liesl Thomas. I am the current chair of the Victorian chapter of Learning Environments Australasia. So I'm really pleased to be able to formally welcome you all to this event. I'm currently on the land of the Bunurong people, and I would like to respectfully acknowledge them as the traditional owners of land that was never ceded. I'd also like to pay respects to and acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land where you might be, and pay respect to the ongoing living cultures of First Peoples and their elders, past, present and emerging. And I'd like to specifically acknowledge any Aboriginal people that are here today. Welcome to the launch of New School. New School is a collaboration between LEA Victoria and Moonshine Agency. The broader idea for a film started a number of years ago as Innovation High, and in particular, we acknowledge the contributions of Richard Lennon and Fiona Young at Heppel to the project, and I think both of them are here today, which is fantastic.
So on one level, this is a story of education excellence, of change and of advocacy stretching back many years. Decades for some of those in the film, and even longer for the ideas at the heart of the vision for education, which is student-centred, rich in curiosity, and with an emphasis on well-being and on self. The film features Richmond High, Marist College Bendigo, and Linfield Learning Village. And we thank the schools and their principals in particular for their willingness to share their community and share their school. So I'd like to acknowledge Darren McGregor at Marist, the late Colin Simpson at Richmond High, and now Dr. Lars Anderson, and Stephanie McGregor at Linfield. We're also here to explore the role of architecture, and we acknowledge the work of Y2 at Marist, for which they were awarded the A4LE James D. Mcconnell Award in 2020, and Heppel at Richmond and at Linfield, along with Design Inc., BVN, BMC2, and Lacoste and Stevenson. Now, there's quite a list of people involved in that building, and you'll see kind of the complexity of it in the film tonight.
The film also features work by a number of leading Victorian practices, including Minx Architecture with Hazel Glen College and St Louis de Montfort Catholic Primary School, Clark Hopkins Clark at Cokesville Primary School, and Grey Puck Sand with Paran High School. In filmmaking parlance, these are probably best described as supporting cast, but we know that they have each contributed to the ongoing conversation we are engaged in as a sector. It's this conversation that we seek to contribute to as an organisation, and one we feel we are moving along with this film. Tonight, we capture the contributions of experts to this conversation, and we thank Dr. Julia Atkin, Dr. Ben Cleveland, and Professor Adrian Piccoli and Greg Whitby. Along with the principals mentioned above, we draw on the insights of teachers Yana, Victoria, and James, along with parents Simone Fawcett and students Matthew, Alec, Alia, George, and Ned. It's quite the cast, but it illustrates the complexity of the stakeholder groups and the importance of getting the work of schooling right.
To help us with this conversation, we have the privilege of welcoming two key contributors to the film, Stephen Heppel and Stephanie Mcconnell, to help launch tonight. Stephen and Stephanie will join us for a Q&A after the screening, and by way of a quick introduction that I'll expand on after the screening, Stephen Heppel is an education extraordinaire. Not really sure how else to describe him in a single word, but he's an influencer and an advocate, a dynamic speaker, and an academic dedicated to improving the education experience for youngsters. He works around the planet when permitted, and if you've had the pleasure of working with him, you'll know what I mean. And if not, well, then after tonight's film, I suspect there'll be a bit of a queue for his services. Stephanie is foundation principal at Linfield Learning Village and is really at the vanguard of progressive education in this country. Her dedication to well-being and dynamic learning is evident in the film, in how passionately she speaks. And we're really lucky to pinch a bit of her time in what is clearly a busy schedule made even busier by lockdown and by homeschooling. So in the spirit of furthering the conversation and pushing ideas, we welcome your questions through the chat function in the webinar tonight, which will remain open. So as you've got questions, please pop them in there. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I think that's really the extent of our 40 minutes, and we want to jump on and spend at least the next 30 minutes, 32 minutes perhaps, asking as many questions as possible. So I can see that there are plenty of questions coming in. We've got people sorting through those, and we're really quite keen. I'm looking at making sure I sift through as many of them or get to read as many of them as possible, and that'll be that's fantastic to see. And maybe we can even follow up on some of these as topics and as guides for how we approach the coming year as well. So even if we don't get to your particular question tonight, please don't worry, they'll all be read, and we'll definitely be taking them on board in some way or another. So as you can see, we've got Stephen and Stephanie in the house now. So welcome, Stephen. It's great to see you. So pleased.
It's good to be here. I'm sitting in a van outside a hospital. Actually, I'm just I fell in a skip earlier in the year, broke my hip, so I'm just popping in to have my repaired hip looked at. So this is an interesting moment, you know. But if you forgive the van, my brain's okay anyway.
Okay, awesome. Well, I might just give you a quick introduction, and then we'll jump into a couple of questions. Lisa, in fact, if you could introduce Stephanie straight after me, I think that'd be great, and then we can jump into it straight away.
Sure.
So, Stephen, are you joining us from Madrid? Is that right?
No, I'm in England at the moment.
Oh, you're in England. Right.
Yeah. So although I work in Madrid, I'm wearing that same T-shirt now. You know. We're in the holiday period now, and anyway, most of the projects are all around the world. So yeah, I'm in Madrid for quite a lot of October, but not at the moment.
Well, that's thrown the first line of my introduction out, but that doesn't matter because
well,
what's important is that you're here. Some of the formalities are that Stephen's professor, the Philippe Segovia Chair of Innovation at Universidad Camilo José Cella. Am I saying that right? I hope so.
Close enough. UCJC will do.
UCJC. I should have known. There's an acronym. So Stephen's really a sought-after consultant across the globe, focusing on policy, ICT, and learning spaces. And he's a contemporary learning expert covering many fields, a polymath really by any measure. And to engage with him is to enter a deeply considered and a generous set of ideas. And we're really lucky to have him joining us from England tonight. Lisa.
I get to introduce Stephanie. She is the foundation principal at Linfield Learning Village. Now, any principal position is hard work, but the role of a foundation principal is just something different. It means that Stephanie designed her school from the ground up. All of the work, all of the ideas, all of the risk of those ideas lay on her. Now, those who have worked closely with schools will know the uncompromising emphasis on risk and the need to mitigate against it. And as foundation principal, Stephanie had to run her ideas through that filter as well. Luckily, Stephanie also had Stephen Heppel helping her to pull these ideas together. So we're jumping into Q&A with this duo of thinkers willing to continue the conversation. So let's get going. And there are so many questions coming in, I'm feeling completely overwhelmed.
Yes, me too. But there are a few I've seen that are just rippers. To get us started, I'm going to direct this at you, Stephen, but Stephanie, I think it'd be something really you could jump into as well. And to address the elephant in the room, I just want to talk a little bit about the interruption of COVID, but I don't really want to dwell on a negative, at least for the first part. I want to acknowledge the serious impact on students, but I really think that it could be an opportunity in that it's been extremely disruptive, and it has really made us rethink what is possible and how quickly we can adapt. I was chatting to a bureaucrat in New South Wales who said, we've been asking teachers to adapt and do online teaching for 20 years and getting a huge amount of resistance. And then when COVID hit, everybody had 2 weeks to get it sorted. And guess what? They did. So there's kind of some really interesting insights out of COVID. And so I guess my question is, what are kind of some of the really positive things that you think might lead to, or what are the positive changes that might emerge out of the disruptions of COVID? And so I guess you can kind of take that question in any direction you like, Stephen.
No, it's probably the question of the century, really. And I kind of take you back briefly to Second World War, kids were evacuated in England from their homes. One of my PhD students was sent off to work on a Welsh farm for 3 years with his baby sister, didn't see home again in all that time. And in London, we had the Blitz, and kids being bombed and hiding in bus shelters and hiding down in the underground. And obviously with COVID, with twice as many deaths as we had with the Blitz, But the thing was, that generation went through their learning, never knowing what tomorrow was going to look like. And, when I look at the roster of names who've changed our world, I find Vivienne Westwood, I find John Lennon, I find Clive Sinclair, I find, the exceptional thinkers that thought out of the box, if you like, but we're actually ready to try something different. We're characterized by that wartime generation, kids who were born and had their learning experiences, and they were a golden generation. And my belief is that the COVID generation, are the next golden generation. If we had more time, we'd rehearse about why this seems to happen about every 75 years, but that's for another debate. But one of the things we've been doing, we've produced this certificate where we just ask kids to describe the learning they'd been doing during COVID while they've been at home. And remember, I'm building a school in Peru. The kids there were locked in their homes for 6 months, weren't allowed out of the front door, So other parts of the world, and I'm doing some work in India at the moment, and they're all still on lockdown. They haven't been into school for nearly a year, So other parts of the world have got it tougher. But what's been really interesting about this little certificate, two things. One is the pride with which children have shown what they've done. A lot of the wonderful film, but a lot of what you hear in the film is about agency and learner-led and student voice. And Stephanie saying we thought it's pretty hard to build a plane. We didn't even know what we're building really. And and the kids have been such an important part of that. The second thing is what they've actually done, and boy, do we learn from this. So when kids are taken out of the traditional schools that you heard Greg and others describing, what do? Well, they do three things. Firstly, they went for depth. They absolutely said, I'm really interested in this. I'm just going to do more and more and more of it. So stage, not age, a phrase you've heard often in the film. They went for depth. Secondly, they did it with others and they didn't care what age they were. So they worked with their siblings, they worked with their grandparents, they worked with their community. They're really important. And thirdly, they had an audience for what they did. And the audience was a different audience to the traditional school audience, so they were showing off to their friends and family and locals and the milkman or whoever was interested. They were saying, look what I've learned about space or the Stone Age or whatever it is that they settled on, And of course, when you look at the film, you find kids who are ambitious for themselves, who want to, stage on ages the way the whole world works, apart from education, and teachers there describing their learning, all being part of that huge learning family. So I think what COVID has taught us is that it ain't hard to build new learning because the kids did it while they were outside of the system. What we've got to do is to keep up with them. And, they want to be the best they can possibly be. And it turns out they knew some of how to do that. And that's really exciting.
Great. Yeah. Kids will learn despite schools, or they don't need schools in order to learn, do they?
These kids are going to face unexpected problems. So they're going to face floods and pestilence, and they're going to face climate catastrophes. They're going to face crazy politicians. I mean, all the things that are coming at them, none of which they were expecting, and they need to be able to know how to apply the knowledge they've got and the skills they've got to solve those problems. And what we saw after the Second World War was that golden generation knew how to do it. And they built really the great leaps forward that we're enjoying now. This current golden generation will save the world, ain't no doubt about it. And we need to make sure we leave them their ingenuity and their curiosity and their playfulness and don't extinguish it. Otherwise they won't, and they can't.
I think the joy of the whole situation is that schools often get in the way of learning. And when you get school out of the way, you actually see the value of, that learning happens 24/7. And if you can create minds that are excited about learning and who seek learning for themselves, then, as teachers, we should be just setting them free and enabling that, and not setting up, the scenarios that we do in schools because it's the way we've always done it, which is all about teacher control. And that's the hardest thing to let go of.
But it turns out, the kids want to be a part of the action, and I'll give you a silly example, really, that everybody would relate to. I do a lot of work with elite sports teams as well. We work with the British Olympic team, the rugby people, and so on. Real Madrid Football Club, and one of the things they really focus on is food. What should you eat before your big event? What should you eat before the big match? What should you eat before your heat, your final? We don't do any of that in education. We've been doing this stuff in Spain, looking at brain food. And this whole booklet was produced by kids. This is kids research, kids working with the school caterers to say, how can we make the food we eat, let our brains be as sharp as they could possibly be? We want to eat the food that's going to make us hit our personal best in terms of learning. Why haven't we done that in education? But the kids saw it first, and they're on it like a shot. So they need that agency. They need that trust that Stephanie speaks of. They need, this isn't about co-construction. This is about learner-led, and that's a step further than many places have been before.
Stephanie, there's quite a few questions in the chat about teachers. Do we have the right teachers? Are we training the teachers in the right way? What's the impact on teacher workload? How are the teachers coping to actually create these awesome kids that we need for the future? I wonder if that's something you could comment on.
Absolutely. I was noticing that there's some great questions in the chat. I wish we could get to all of them. But yes, I particularly noticed that theme running through about teachers, and it is a really important one. And, in the film, I think, a lot of the people that we heard were talking about that reimagining, that rethinking of learning spaces, and rethinking of how we design learning for young people. And what I find in the experience that we've had is that there is a real yearning amongst teachers, and not just young teachers, not just people coming out of university, to do things differently, because many people have been in the game, in education, for long enough to see that it is not serving its purpose. It is not fit for purpose. It is not meeting the needs of young people of this century, and it's probably not even meeting the needs of children of the last part of last century either, to be perfectly honest. And that's why, I'm so passionate about that. We not only need to change what's happening in schools, but we need to apply all of that knowledge of what good learning looks like to teaching teachers and giving them opportunities. And what I find is you open up the opportunity for teachers to tap into their creativity, and amazing things happen. Again, another thing that happens in schools is this top-down approach where there's, particularly in our system, in this state, and in public education particularly, it is driven by fear. And so teachers are very much afraid of what they, and I don't know yet in my 30 years of experience who they are yet, because I keep pushing it to see what they will do, and they haven't done anything yet. So, it's about reassuring people that it is okay to take risks, and it's okay to fail. And if we're going to tell kids it's okay to fail, then we've got to tell teachers that as well. That question on teacher workload is a really interesting one, because I think we have done a lot of thinking about that and a lot of talking about that at my school, because it is something that is really significant. And what we've done is take out a lot of stuff that wastes teachers' time. So we quite deliberately stripped out the time wasting stuff. And we always think first of all, what is the most efficient way of us to achieve what we're doing? It's all about design thinking. The constraints are there. So, you know, what we want to do is make life more efficient. So we don't do stupid stuff like assemblies and roll call and all of those kind of things that waste time, and they're all about teacher control again. We work collaboratively all the time. All of our learning and learning design happens collaboratively. Nobody works in an isolated way ever. And we also check in regularly with our teachers. I did a survey of my staff last week, actually, because we're currently doing a big review process with John Hattie, actually. So John said, you know, how do your teachers feel about working at Linfield? And so, you know, I pushed out a survey which really gave them the opportunity to say, I love it, I hate it, you know, and we were overwhelmed by the response from staff who just said, I couldn't go back to a normal school after being at Linfield. The opportunity to actually make a difference in the way that we are, to work collaboratively, to work in this environment, in this way with young people, is just such a significant opportunity that, you know, and we asked about workload, and they are feeling really quite on top of it. So you've got to work it in.
Let me give very quickly just such a practical example, because my middle daughter's a school principal. My eldest daughter runs a beach school out in the open, you know. So, you know, I know how exhausted teachers are at this point. I've never seen the profession more overworked. So let's take something as simple as noise control. You know, they spend a lot of time in teacher training, teacher preparation, you know, how to manage the noise in the classroom. It's a huge job for teachers. They worry about it. They often shut the door because they're nervous that the noise will carry down the corridors, and then all the problems of poor ventilation stuff. We put a simple tablet into classrooms, and the tablet runs a decibel meter, and the kids can see data for how noisy the class is. And 2 kids each day are given the job of being noise monitors. So if the class is a bit noisy or there's a slightly heated conversation, those 2 kids will walk over and say, hey, shush it down a bit. It becomes the children's task. And, you know, the teacher, by the way, we reward them if they can stay out of the orange zone on the, you know, on the needle. They go to lunch 5 minutes early because they've been, you know, so focused all morning, you know, and it turns out kids can control their own sound incredibly well. It's not a job that a teacher needs to even think about doing. And the minute the kids realize when it's a little bit quieter, their progress is better, their work's better, they're more satisfied, they can't wait to do it. So what we've done in the past is take all the jobs and give them all to the teacher. The teacher can't possibly do them all. So the key thing here is to give a lot of it back to the kids, you know, and mentoring and helping. And a big reason why we embrace writable surfaces in learning spaces is when kids are writing on the wall, another kid who's done that piece of work can say, oh, I can see where you're going wrong. Let me intervene. Or if the kid's sitting there, there's nothing on the wall, they've been there for a quarter of an hour, everybody can see they're not doing very much, and they'll go over and see why. When you're writing in your exercise book or on your tablet or on your laptop, it's a very private thing, and nobody's going to help you. Nobody can see you need help. So, you know, these big public writable surfaces allow the children to support each other, and all this is pulling the burden away from the teacher, helping the children to help each other. So it's you know, of course they wouldn't want to go back because this is a better way to teach.
One of the tensions I think we've spoken, well, the film tries to address has come up in Kim Thomas's question, and I really do think it's kind of system-wide, and I really do think there's kind of there's a real risk of regression at this point, especially with kind of the impacts of COVID and this kind of myth of learning loss. But Kim talks about working in a Catholic ed system which has performed second bottom in Australia on NAPLAN. How do I convince the system not to go back to explicit teaching of the basics? I think you recognise kind of a universal tension in that question.
Oh my goodness. Yes. So I did see that question as well. And my instant response is, well, the way we have been doing it hasn't worked, has it? So quite honestly, if that is the perfect opportunity to to take risks. If the traditional way of teaching kids is not getting the NAPLAN results, and let's just put aside the fact of whatever we think about NAPLAN, because getting me started on that, we will not be out of here before midnight. But really, the point is the way that we have been doing it is not getting the results that people in the wider world, in politics, in society generally, view as success. Well, we've got to change something else in the system. So if it is about, empowering students, empowering young people and teachers to think differently about what learning could look like, that kind of stuff will follow. If we use NAPLAN as the one guideline, the one measure of success, then we've missed the point. And so I really would encourage, that person and their school to take the challenge forward. They've got nothing to lose.
But also, look, I mean, when we've seen big change in the past, it takes time to get everybody on board. When they start, they used to, in medicine, I do a lot of work in health as well. In medicine, they used to bleed people to bleed the humours from them to make them better. And the KPI for bleeding was how many times did you bleed your patient, not did they get better. How many exams did they take, not whether they were any good in their job. The parallels are pretty stark. And even when it became very obvious that good hygiene and things like that would have a bigger effect, they finally managed to stop surgeons coming straight from the mortuary into the operating theatre. They said, stop and wash your hands between the body and the patient. When they started doing that, it took a long time before everybody did it. And there were people who had a vested interest in the bleeding. You still see them all over Australia as barber shops, those red and white poles, representing the blood and the bandage. It was the barbers that were doing the bleeding. They were still bleeding people way after, 50 years after the medicine had changed, So it just takes a time. But there's no reason you shouldn't wait until everybody's on board, because they'll never always be on board. There will always be educational fundamentalists. Blimey, you've got the Taliban, there'll always be people with daft ideas. You can't wait for them all. Just do it and do it right. There was a lovely moment when I remember Steve Jobs coming on stage. I'm talking to you on an iPhone, sitting in the van, talking to Australia on an iPhone, and the phone stuck to the steering wheel with some sticky tape, And I remember Steve Jobs coming on stage. Steve Jobs, by the way, was the first sponsor of my chair when I was a very young professor. He sponsored my chair, and he said, "Look, we've invented a better iPod for music. We've invented a machine that allows you to browse and do computer things. We've invented a better phone. And look, they're all the same thing." Well, there were still people 10 years later who were wandering around with a BlackBerry saying, it's very important that I have a proper keyboard. That's the most important thing. They've all gone now. And, just takes a bit of time. So, just grab hold of the best possible ideas. You've got a great film here to give you a lot of them, and just go running off with it. And if you got some clown, got people, behaving in a Taliban-like way, it's okay. Just wait, they'll get there, but they ain't going to get there yet.
I wonder if that's a good place to take the conversation, because again, there's a few questions about the design process and particularly working with the community and perhaps bringing a community on the journey. And there's also a couple of questions about the voices of Indigenous communities in the design process. So maybe a couple of comments on that.
I'll go on, you go, Steph.
No, Stephen, I was just going to say it's probably worth going back to the community consultation that we did in 2013, which engaged all of those people. So maybe you want to talk about that.
Yeah, I think you heard in the film the words, agency and learner voice often enough, and there were some exciting moments in that consultation. We had a lot of people turned up, kind of interested to see what was going to happen, and I remember we gave them a list of ways in which the school could embrace some of the best ideas from around the world, station on age being one of them, but other things as well. And we and Fiona put up a kind of online feedback session that parents could chip into, you know, and then came back after a couple of months. And I remember a big burly guy got up in the front row and said, all those things on the list, they all work, don't they? And I said, yeah, well, they all do. He said, well, we want them all. Why wouldn't we have them all? You know, why would we only have 2 or 3? You know, and bang, there's Linfield. You know, so parents are enormously ambitious for their kids. They want them to be the best they could be. They want them to hit their personal best. They want them to be full of delight, because learning is going to last them a whole lifetime. But we've gone quite a long way with that in Spain. So one of the things we're doing, kind of reversing the thing in Spain, is we're saying to our parents, we've only just started this last year, we're saying, look, you've been kind enough to put your kids into the school. We would like to help you as learners as well. And we're giving them free access to a huge range of courses. We've done it up with Coursera, you know, the online course people, but other options are available for sure, you know. And we're saying to them, you've lost your job as a retail manager, and you want to, you know, retail's gone down the tubes, you want to do something else, or you want to learn programming, or you've been a stay-at-home parent and you want to up your skills, we'll support you. We'll give you the courses. We're supporting the whole family on this learning journey, you know. And I remember in the very early days when we were throwing technology at schools, you know, I put a PhD student, Phil, into some of the very poor households, because we were really worried that kids coming home connected to the world with technology, you know, white heater technology flowing through their veins, we were worried that that would sort of force a divide between them and their parents, you know, single parent, poor education, no job, no employment. We thought, oh, looks, you know, we're going to build the very opposite happened. When the kids went to bed, the parents picked up the tablet and said, here, I'm having some of this, you know. So I don't believe we can do this without doing it with and for our parents as well. And I think that sense of, you know, learning village turns out to be a really, really good description of what needs to happen here. And, you know, we neglect them at the parent. And just a quick word about because I saw that Indigenous question is so important. You know, we've divorced a lot of learning from, you know, the knowledge and the expertise of communities and the groundedness of and my eldest daughter runs a beach school, beachschool.org, go and have a look. And we've got preschool kids doing proper marine biology down on the beach. The whole thing's outdoors. And of course, they found that the knowledge of the old oyster fishermen and some of the old boat builders, which is a coastal thing, of course, you know, they found that the knowledge of the community is incredibly valuable. And the old fishermen have realized that the kids who are studying flora and fauna on a daily basis, you know, properly understand, oh, this is when the baby crabs are appearing, they're a bit late this year, what's happening to the weather. That conversation between the wisdom of generations and the excitement of new knowledge is really rich and is very grounded, you know. And I think, you know, we neglect that at our peril. We've taken education, put it in a box. And the worst example I've seen of this has been we've been doing some work in some very poor parts of the world. The kids spend, you know, a couple of hours battling their way to school through forests and across rivers and, you know, climbing up mountainsides on vines. And it's just a journey from hell, you know. They get to school, dust off, put on their uniform, go in, shut the door, learn about glacial scenery or moraines or something, you know, and then they go home. And actually, the learning was the 2 hours coming to school and the 2 hours going home, but nobody thought to accredit that or make it part of it. You know, we've compartmentalized learning so much, we've forgotten that the good stuff is all out there. And that's changing. I mean, one of the things that happened with COVID was people started walking around their neighborhoods and looking at local learning. And that gene is not going to go back in the bottle.
Yeah, I just wanted to call out the comment about engaging Indigenous voices in the design, because a lot of my journey has involved the privilege of visiting schools through, you know, my involvement with LEA, but also, you know, in visiting schools beyond that, and particularly in New Zealand. And I think you guys do that so much better than we do. And I am embarrassed to say that that Australian schools are nowhere near where you are at in terms of engaging their Indigenous community in anything, you know, like it should be. However, I was really privileged to walk the site before we started building at Linfield with my local Indigenous elder. And it was a very special time for me that I carry those stories with me, and he gave me those stories as a gift to the community. And particularly because the site where Linfield is a very significant site in terms of its Indigenous history. It was a place of corroboree and a place of education throughout millennia, and that the women of the original custodians of the land were the educators of the time. So he was really excited that the school would be led by a woman, and he sort of encouraged me to take those stories forward and to engage our local community, and we continue to aim to do that. And again, I think that's something that we can always improve on further, and it is a really important point to make.
Yeah, and it turns out that a few thousand years of prototyping, communities are learning from each other. They got a few things right, didn't they? Oh yeah.
Well, Lisa, we've run out of time for questions, but there are a few comments that I think that you need to make in the last 2 minutes or so.
We do. Look, I think what we have done in past instances where we've run out of time is that we will collate these questions and we will work out how we take this conversation forward. There's lots of queries there about getting access to the film, how people can see it again, how people can share it with their, friends, relatives, work colleagues, the entire world. Everyone who's here today is lucky to be the first ones to see it ever, but we are certainly expecting that it will get wings and fly and will really serve to build the conversation. And we will take that conversation ourselves, all of those questions, bring them together. These online webinar discussions are a great way for us to come together and continue these conversations, perhaps with a glass of wine, perhaps with people in the background able to actually speak instead of having to type their questions in the chat. So we'll even let you be part of the conversation too. There's also some very complimentary comments there about Scott's comparing skills. So, hopefully we won't lose him to Grand Designs or similar. But yeah, lots of
say yes to Bear Grylls. That's all.
Yeah. lots of fabulous comments there. There are a few little housekeeping things for registered Victorian architects. There are CPD points available, and the link was in the email that went out to you with the link for this webinar. So the link is there if you want to claim those CPD points. LEA's regional awards are being announced next week. So if you haven't registered to hear those announcements on the 16th of September, you can go to the LEA website and find the link for that event. So that is coming up. And I think that's kind of it, apart from thanking our amazing panelists. I promised Scott that I would actually sit in the background and not ask lots of questions, and I failed dismally and still only managed to ask a couple of questions. So we clearly could continue on this conversation over and over and over again and continue on for a very long time. We didn't get to talk about furniture. We didn't get to talk about the fact that, hang on, those spaces are pretty grey and urban. Yeah, that's an inner city school. That's probably why, so there's a whole lot of questions there that we'd really love to explore further. So yeah, I think that's kind of it. Did I miss anything out, Scott, that you were expecting me to say?
On just on the logistics front, just that there's an email, I think, Georgie, if you could pop that in the chat for anyone who's interested in showing the film or looking to share it with their community, please get in contact with us via that email. We're doing this with a spirit of generosity, so please do get in contact. And also really just to say thank you so much, Stephen and Stephanie, for giving up your time this evening here and in the morning where you are, Stephen, particularly given your morning's agenda. Thanks so much for sharing, and thank you for your generosity in helping us make the film what's clearly been positively received. And I'm particularly proud of the work that we've done and the ideas we've brought forward. So thank you again so much.
Yeah, and so look, just to finish up, to follow on that, this has been a journey that started years ago with Innovation High and Richard and Fiona, but certainly has then been continued on with Moonshine, and then Scott really pushing it to this point. So we're really excited to be having that kind of step change in getting this conversation going again. So really thrilled to see people here. There's still nearly 150 people online, and we're just cranking over time. Before I do finish though, in Australia it is actually Are You OK Day. So for me, seeing this film is really inspirational and really helps me bring a positive spin into how I'm feeling about life in general and the future, and feelings of positivity and possibility, but that isn't always the case for everybody. So maybe it's time to think about whether there are people in your lives that you need to ask whether they are okay, and actually ask that question of yourself too. And if you need to take care of yourself or reach out, please do that as well. So really wanted to acknowledge that in this, it's difficult times. It's really difficult times, and we need to all take care of ourselves and each other. But yeah, on that note, it's been really fabulous having you all here, and thank you very much.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you, and thanks for everybody. Had some nice messages about my hip coming through on Twitter as well while this is going. So yeah, I'm on the road to recovery. Don't worry about me, and I'll be back out with you soon. I'm happy to, if we can find a place to put those questions, I'm happy to be part of the dialogue of answering all those. So there's some really good points going past, but I would just reiterate that this is the best decade of your lives coming up. You're going to be leading the golden generation who are going to change our planet forever. And just it doesn't get any better than that. And 25 million people on my website last year. There's a lot of people interested in this stuff. So this movie is a great asset to help people feel optimistic about where to go and to be brave and to go off and do it. So let's get it out there. Let's get 1 million views before Christmas. Let's do it. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks.